The first one I called on.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. This is chaos, guys. Go ahead.
The Lebanese army says Israeli forces violated the ceasefire hours after it took effect, shelling several southern villages. Israel had no immediate comment, but earlier said its forces remain deployed, citing what it described as continued Hezbollah activity.
One moment, it sounded like a late-night comedy bit. Marco Rubio, standing in for the White House press secretary, joked about reporters wearing the wrong colors, admitted he was struggling to call on people, and turned a tense room into a viral clip. But behind the laughter was something much more serious. In one appearance, Rubio laid out the administration's case on Iran, defended a military posture in the Strait of Hormuz, hinted at future action on Cuba, addressed tensions involving Pope Leo, and described Hezbollah as the central obstacle to peace between Israel and Lebanon. What went viral as a chaotic press room performance was also a concentrated burst of high-stakes foreign policy messaging.
Two questions. There's a lot of people in here.
That's all under your umbrella.
All right. Well, you answer. You can ask me two questions. I'll give you one answer. Go
Thank you
ahead.
very much. I appreciate
And I'll pick the one I like better.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
The first one I called on.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. This is chaos, guys. Go ahead. Where you? No, right there. I you both are wearing black.
Thank you.
She's closer. No, you don't have black. You have blue on. I'm colorblind, but I know blue and black.
Thank you so much.
That contrast is the story. Rubio's humor worked because it lowered the temperature in the room. But it also made the administration's message easier to deliver. Iran is the villain, the shipping crisis is urgent, Cuba is unstable, the Vatican relationship can be managed, and U.S. pressure is justified across multiple fronts. In other words, the comedy wasn't separate from the policy. It was part of the packaging. And that matters, because viewers who came for the viral moment may not realize just how sweeping Rubio's claims were, from stranded civilian sailors in the Gulf to humanitarian aid in Cuba, to a blunt warning that Iran must never be allowed to normalize control over one of the world's most important waterways. Rubio's central message was that the laughs in the briefing room should not distract from the stakes outside it. He framed the Strait of Hormuz as a test of whether Iran could effectively hold the world hostage, not just the United States, but energy markets, commercial shipping, food supply chains, and humanitarian cargo. He argued that if Iran can mine waters, threaten ships, and impose a new normal in one of the world's most strategic passages, then every future crisis becomes more dangerous. That is why the administration wanted the room and the audience beyond it to remember one line above all: Iran cannot be allowed to normalize control of the strait. Whether viewers agree with that framing or not, Rubio was very clearly trying to turn a chaotic press appearance into a public case for escalation, deterrence, and endurance.
Mr. Secretary.
It's good to see you.
Good morning.
It was almost a year that was here with you.
1 day, well, no, 10 days off.
Secretary Rubio,
Yeah.
you are going to the Vatican to meet with the Pope. Is this an attempt to smooth things over with the Pope, given the rhetoric between President Trump and Pope Leo?
No, I mean, it's a trip we had planned from before, and obviously we had some stuff that happened. And no, look, there's a lot to talk about with the Vatican. I'll give you one example. The Pope just returned from a trip to Africa, where the church is growing very vibrantly. And we have shared concerns about religious freedom, freedom in different parts of the world. We'd love to talk to them about that. The topic of Cuba, we gave Cuba $6 million of humanitarian aid, but obviously they won't let us distribute it.
And the president recently said that the Pope is endangering a lot of Catholics as a result of his rhetoric around the Iran war. Is that a sentiment?
Well, I don't think that's an accurate description of what he said. I think what the president basically said is that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon because they would use it against places that have a lot of Catholics and Christians and others for that matter.
This was one of the briefing's most revealing turns. A room that began with jokes about jackets and seating charts suddenly moved into a dispute involving the Pope, the Middle East, and Cuba's humanitarian crisis. Rubio's answer was careful. He insisted the Vatican trip had been planned already, stressed shared concerns over religious freedom, and used Cuba to show where church diplomacy still matters. But politically, the moment was bigger than that. The administration needed to signal that Trump's public criticism of Pope Leo had not broken a key international relationship. So Rubio did what experienced operators do in tense moments. He minimized the drama, kept the message narrow, and returned to practical cooperation. The subtext was unmistakable. Even when the rhetoric gets ugly, Washington still needs the Vatican.
A 10-day truce between Israel and Lebanon went into effect at midnight local time on Thursday, as Trump hinted at possible talks with Iran over the weekend, raising hopes the Iran war is nearing an end. Celebratory gunfire and fireworks echoed across parts of Beirut as the ceasefire began. Yet for many displaced Lebanese families, the ceasefire offers little comfort and deep uncertainty about what comes next.
They gave a 10-day deadline, but we don't accept that. 10 days, if we want to go back to our homes, 10 days and the war returns. We don't want that. Either our land is fully returned or we don't want the ceasefire. We'll continue with the war.
The pause in fighting has already shown signs of strain. The Lebanese army says Israeli forces violated the ceasefire hours after it took effect, shelling several southern villages. Israel had no immediate comment, but earlier said its forces remain deployed, citing what it described as continued Hezbollah activity. Before the ceasefire took effect, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the truce could open the door to a broader agreement between the two countries.
We have an opportunity to reach a historic peace agreement with Lebanon. President Trump intends to invite me and the President of Lebanon in order to try to advance this agreement.
Trump also struck an optimistic tone before the ceasefire, saying he's held direct talks with regional leaders and believes progress could come quickly.
We're going to be meeting with Bibi Netanyahu, as you know, and the president of Lebanon. And I had a great talk with both of them today. They're going to be having a ceasefire, and that'll include Hezbollah.
Israel's bombing campaign in Lebanon against the Iran-backed Hezbollah emerged as a major obstacle to securing a peace deal between the U.S. and Iran. If the Lebanon ceasefire clears the way for a broader peace deal with Iran, it would be a significant win for the Trump administration, which has struggled so far to reopen the strategically important Strait of Hormuz and block Iran's path to a nuclear weapon. There are also signs of possible compromise on Iran's nuclear program. Two Iranian sources say Tehran is considering shipping out part of its highly enriched uranium stockpile, something it had previously ruled out. At last weekend's talks, the U.S. eased demands for a permanent ban, instead proposing a long-term suspension of Iranian nuclear activity. A Pakistani security source says Washington has offered sanctions relief and the unfreezing of Iranian assets in an effort to secure a deal.
By this point, the pattern of the briefing was clear. Rubio wasn't answering isolated questions. He was building a single geopolitical story. Iran sits behind multiple crises, and the United States is the only power willing to confront the chain reaction. That is why Lebanon, Hormuz, Cuba, and even the Vatican all ended up in the same performance. The administration wanted to present every issue as connected: shipping disruption, energy pain, armed proxies, humanitarian blockages, regional instability, and ideological adversaries all tied into one larger confrontation. And Rubio, with his mix of humor and discipline, was uniquely suited to deliver that frame. He made the room laugh, then used that attention to push a stark argument: this is not disorder at the edges. This is a battle over who gets to shape the rules.
Well, they shouldn't be doing it, but I've left notification. Anything ever happens, we're going to blow the whole country is going to get blown up. So we've, originally Biden should have said something, when they made a statement. We always said, why isn't Biden saying anything? Because he didn't. But a president has to defend a president. Like if I were here and they were making that threat to somebody, not even a president, but somebody like they did with me, I would absolutely hit them so hard. But I have very firm instructions. Anything happens, they're going to wipe them off the face of this earth.
Right now, we have a number of 490 confirmed protester deaths. That includes 8 children. And we are still right now investigating over 500 additional cases. So that means that should we confirm all of these numbers, the number of those killed will exceed 1,000. And that's in just 15 days, which is, it's extraordinary. The same with the arrests. We have documented over 10,600 arrests, but we have many cases that we are still verifying. We have documented over 90 forced confessions that have aired on state television. And I think that it's really important to highlight this issue. These individuals are, arbitrarily arrested. They are transferred to unknown locations. They are tortured psychologically and physically. And oftentimes these confessions are used in their trials against them. And they often serve as justifications to sentence them to death. It's always a concern when we see that initial, full internet shutdown, because what happens is we start to see increased violence. We start to see things happening behind this veil of sort of secrecy. And it's usually an indicator for us that analyze from the outside that this is when the regime intends to really start their crackdown.
Iran's deadly crackdown appears to have largely quelled protests for now, according to a rights group and residents, though state media reported more arrests on Friday. US President Donald Trump has threatened to intervene if the government keeps killing demonstrators.
We've been told that the killing in Iran is stopping.
But fears of a US attack have retreated since Wednesday, when Trump said he'd been told fewer people were dying and there were no plans for executions. Several residents of Tehran said the capital had been quiet since Sunday. Drones were flying over the city, but they'd seen no sign of protests on Thursday or Friday. An Iranian Kurdish rights group, Hengor, also reported protests had halted, adding, the security environment remains highly restrictive. There were reports of sporadic unrest in some areas on Friday. But a protest death toll reported by US-based rights group Harana has increased little for several days. It stands at nearly 2,700 people since protests broke out in late December, the vast majority of them protesters. Reuters hasn't been able to independently verify the figures. An Iranian official said earlier this week about 2,000 people had been killed in the unrest. Those numbers dwarf the tolls from previous bouts of unrest that have been suppressed by the Islamic Republic.
What made this briefing go viral was not just that Marco Rubio was funny. It was that he was funny while describing a world he says is coming apart. In one room, he turned confusion into control, jokes into headlines, and a substitute appearance into a message about war, power, pressure, and American resolve. That is why this moment matters. The laughter made it shareable. The policy made it consequential. And if you strip away the punchlines, what remains is an administration telling the public that Iran is central to multiple global fault lines, that Cuba remains unresolved, that church diplomacy still matters, and that the United States believes it must act because few others can. So yes, it was chaos. But it was also choreography. And that is exactly why people are still watching it.